Hello and welcome to ETAuto. The world we live in is facing a climate crisis like never before. And as the United Nations says, it's code red for humanity. Many corrective measures perhaps should have been taken years ago. But however, there is still hope and some time left to take the necessary steps before we reach an irreversible, unfortunate stage. The automotive industry, the mobility industry globally have key roles to play in this regard. For them to play their roles well, a mix of right technologies and policies are absolutely necessary. To discuss what could be the best ways to use these tools to contribute towards a better environment, we have with us Dr. Andrew Palmer, more popular in the industry as Andy Palmer, who is an engineer and industry veteran and who is currently the vice chairman and global CEO of Switch Mobility, an electric bus and van OEM. And he is also an ambassador for the COP26 Business Climate Leaders Campaign. Andy, thank you very much for talking to us.
It's always a pleasure to talk.
Great. So to start off with, Andy, if I may ask, as a business ambassador, what's the message you would carry to the COP26 event?
Actually, you've kind of conveyed the message perfectly. We've known about the climate crisis for some time now. I mean, I started the development of the Nissan Leaf 15 years ago, and it wasn't without a fairly good understanding that the temperature in the world was rising, and we had to do something about it. Unfortunately, humanity tends only to react almost when it's too late, and we have to create a real crisis now. Basically, businesses need to step forward. And my message really is that in stepping forward, there aren't simply disadvantages. Those people that can step forward effectively, but those people that can take, if you will, business advantage of a changing world, can also build business around sustainability. The Nissan Leaf was a first step, and we see now how all car companies are moving towards electric cars. My own company, which is Switch Mobility Limited, which is a combination of Ashok Leyland EV and Optare, bringing together as a new company. I mean, it's basically declared its hand already that from 2021, all of our vehicles will be net zero carbon. So a first mover in the automotive industry. But by doing that, I hope that we can win a business advantage. So it's not all negative, is my point. Being clean, being first mover in the move towards a sustainable circular economy, it is also a business advantage.
And talking about the automotive industry, Andy, how significant a role do you think the automotive industry can or should play in the current scenario of the global climate crisis?
I mean, look, the car industry is a big emitter of CO2. It's not necessarily the worst offender. It's certainly not the only offender, but it tends to be the high-profile offender. People tend to think of CO2 and cars almost in the same breath, where, of course, you have to look to other big emitters of CO2 as well, not least farming, by the way. We need to eat less meat, probably. Being the very visible offender, the car industry needs to clean up its act. Oddly, we were somewhat helped by the VW gate, the issues around cheating of the emission measuring criteria, which has brought on board, in fact, all of the German industry. And I think we're in 2021, when you look at the vehicle launches, almost every new vehicle launch is an EV. So I think that the car industry has pivoted for good reason, because it recognizes the need of the climate, and for bad reasons, insofar as it needs to rectify some of the sins of the past. But I think the car industry is now on an irreversible track towards certainly EV cars. And I think that the debate is around the edges, on the extremes, about what's the role for other technologies like hot hydrogen, like fuel cell, and like e-fuels, which all have a part to play.
In fact, that's what I was also thinking of asking you. But before that, let me ask you on a broader scale, when it comes to technology, in the context of this discussion, which are the ones where you would put the maximum bet on and why? You named a few, but what are the reasons?
Well, the sure bet is obviously EV. I'm a great believer in the principle of Darwinism. And the principle of Darwinism is that you let, politicians define the problem and engineers define the solution. And those solutions can come in many different forms. The problem is when the politicians overstep the mark and start betting on winners, that's when it all goes wrong. And I give you the general drive towards diesels, which was a misstep. So I'm a great believer in lots of different technologies competing against each other and then allowing for the survival of the fittest. That all said, for the majority of customers, the EV solution is almost certainly the right one. Over time, there's a theorem called the Moore's law, and the Moore's law is about the increasing technology and cost equation as something goes from prototype through to mass production, and batteries are on that trail. So EVs will become more affordable. The energy density, in other words, the number of miles that the EVs can go without recharge will increase, and the number of charging stations will increase around the world. And I'm fairly certain that the major winner here will be EVs. The majority of vehicles, the right choice, the best choice for the customer is in fact EV, which means, by the way, if you're talking about technology, then battery is really the winner. Now, interestingly, there are other technologies, and we shouldn't dismiss them. And one of the problems I have, if I give you the example of the UK government, but I'm sure that we can look at other governments around the world, is that they tend to become myopic in that EV is the only solution. And if you do that, then you risk backing your country into a corner, because other countries, and Germany is a good example, are also open to other solutions. And some of those other solutions are quite interesting. Fuel cell, by the way, still needs a battery. So battery technology is still important there. But fuel cell technology could be interesting for heavy goods vehicles, because battery electric has some challenges in the area of trucks. Incidentally, not buses. Buses have a very defined mission. And for them, I'm 100% certain that EV is the right solution. But for trucks and heavy goods vehicles, maybe fuel cell. Or maybe there's a transitory technology which is called hot hydrogen, which is basically the combustion of hydrogen in an internal combustion engine. And that allows you to use the internal combustions that are around today. But obviously, when you combust hydrogen with oxygen, you produce water.
Andy, sorry to interrupt, but then the source of hydrogen also plays a key role there, unless it's green hydrogen.
Absolutely. Talking to the converted, Samantha. So, if we look at the downside of an EV, well, the upside is you don't have an exhaust pipe, so you don't emit anything from the vehicle. But we shouldn't be fooled into saying that is a carbon-free means of transportation, because a lot of carbon is produced in the production of the battery and the vehicle itself. In fact, significantly more than a traditional internal combustion engine. So in thinking about the future manufacturing sites of batteries around Europe, we have to make sure that we're choosing manufacturers that are making their batteries from sustainable energy. And today, most batteries are sourced from Asia, and the source of the energy that's producing those batteries is anything but clean. So that's the first point. So there's a disadvantage, clearly, of EV. But let's go to hydrogen, because many people will say, well, hydrogen is the right solution. Well, today, 99% of the world's hydrogen is basically a consequence of the gas and oil industry. It's simply a byproduct, and therefore it also is not clean. Now, that's so-called grey hydrogen. There is a lot of plans around, which is basically blue hydrogen, which is using the same source of fuel, but basically in a system called carbon capture, which basically takes the CO2 out of the process and stores it. Doesn't seem the right answer to me. It's a palliative, in the same way as, if you like, hot hydrogen is a palliative. But if you want to make hydrogen a sustainable structure or a sustainable form of energy, then you've got to move to something called green hydrogen, which means that you produce hydrogen from a sustainable source. The technology exists, but it's only 1% of the hydrogen produced in the world right now. And if we want to make hydrogen a key part of the economy, and we almost certainly do, then we've got to first of all sort out the source of hydrogen. Secondly, probably there are many other forms of use for that hydrogen, where hydrogen is a better solution than the automotive industry. So, as I say, hydrogen probably represents a possible solution around the edges of transportation, but it is not the main solution by far.
Yes, so you're saying that hydrogen could serve purpose on the edges.
On the edges. And then, look, we also need to look at other forms of fuel. E-fuel, recently discussed in the context of Formula One, for example. But you can't easily fly aircrafts, for example, on either battery power or hydrogen power. So there you need to look for e-fuel. And this is where you drag CO2 out of the atmosphere and turn it essentially back into gasoline, and then you burn the gasoline. It's net zero, but obviously it's not zero tailpipe. But you know, that's one thing that we have to be very clear of. You know, zero tailpipe does not mean net zero. Likewise, net zero doesn't necessarily mean no emissions from the tailpipe. And often that's something I find many people confused about.
Talking about e-fuels or synthetic fuels, Andy, many say that this could probably be potentially the next big thing after the EV technology. But however, it's moved a little more than it's, as of now, it's more than just a laboratory project. Because from another perspective, if it can be adopted on a mass scale, produced and it can be made available at a mass scale, it would perhaps, not perhaps, but it will definitely enhance the longevity of the traditional ICE engine industry, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think e-fuel is a really interesting solution for aircrafts. Yeah, there isn't another solution as far as I can see right now. It's a really interesting solution for sports cars, where you still want that sound of V12 engine, but you can't live with the emissions. So it has up until now been largely laboratory. I think it reaches the big time as the aero industry recognises it has to find solutions, and I think that will propel it very quickly into a potential solution. I'm really happy. I've been calling for several years now for Formula One to adopt an e-fuel solution, because there could be no better advertising case for the merits of e-fuel than seeing them every 2 weeks racing around a track somewhere in the world. And it would draw an interesting contrast to Formula E, which is of course is fully battery electric. And that's what I mean by Darwinism. That's what I mean by survival of the fittest, that we allow these technologies to mature. We don't pick winners. We look for the right solution for each and every customer, and it will be the survival of the fittest that succeeds.
But don't you see, why don't you put the volume, a mass scale passenger vehicle industry, or maybe the mass commercial vehicle industry also maybe as candidate for the usage of e-fuels? Do you see any hurdles there?
Yeah, look, it's going to be a question of cost and speed, and the maturity of those technologies. E-fuel is a little behind compared to other solutions. Fuel cells,
or is it also because the industry globally has moved far ahead in terms of making investments for the future in the form of e-mobility? That the investments are made.
Partially, yes. I mean, look, partially there is a sort of consensus that EV is the way to go, but I think you'll find that the car companies that tend to work on the edges are struggling with that. You know, basically look to the Ferraris and the Aston Martins of the world, and there's no compelling solution for them. Their customers really want the sound of the internal combustion engine. Look to the VTOL emerging industry. This is vertical takeoff and landing, or flying cars. They're still working out whether their best solution is hydrogen or e-fuel or battery. Look to the HGV, the heavy goods vehicles. They're struggling to find solutions with batteries. Some are committing to batteries, others are still experimenting. Fuel cell, and I mean, I started development of fuel cells at the same time that I'd started development of EVs. EV was also very slow to emerge. The Nissan Leaf was launched 10 years ago, and it's only now that the industry has started, I would say, a very compelling move towards EV. Whether fuel cell will work, I have some doubts, because it's very expensive, and it requires very highly refined hydrogen, which is why I sort of throw in the hat this hot hydrogen, because it's a much more pragmatic and maybe transitory solution towards fuel cells. And
how does it compare in terms of cost?
About the same price as Euro 7. So in terms of, if you stick with current technology and you move to Euro 7, which by the way is not cheap and not easy, but hot hydrogen is about the same price. You compare that to a fuel cell is much more expensive, much more complex.
Right. And Andy, I mean, you are someone who is quite familiar with the Indian market because of the previous associations with companies, and in your role at Ashok Leyland. And again, the topic of hydrogen is coming up again in various discussions, and government is also putting focus on. And also, you must have heard some of the union ministers are also talking about flex fuels, making it mandatory. Yeah. So what is the scope for these two alternatives to conventional fossil fuels in a market like India, you think?
Well, my advice to the Indian government is don't pick winners. Talk to your universities, talk to your technologists, talk to your engineers, and they'll give you much more pragmatic solutions. The reality is, because you always get, people, you find it a lot, just go online and say that you think hydrogen is the future solution, and all the EV lovers will attack you online. Go online and say that EV is the solution, and all the hydrogen lovers will attack you to say hydrogen is the right solution. The reality is that engineers can give you, I would say, a more rational explanation of the right technology for the right application. So politicians, please set the targets that you want. Is it zero particulate? Is it zero emission? Is it zero CO2? Is it a combination of all three? And then basically think about the right solution for the right application. And that then is where politicians need to get involved. So, for example, the majority solution will be EVs. And for EVs to work, you need to make sure that you have a charging infrastructure across the country. Don't expect that to come by itself. The government needs to be involved with that. Right. Likewise, don't simply pick hydrogen when clearly the majority of the industry will move towards EV. Anything that what you call flex fuel or CNG or LPG, they're transitionary solutions. They're not full solutions. And something as a friend of India that I observe is that very quickly you need to come to proper solutions around investment in gigafactories, because in all of these solutions, battery will play a significant part. And if you're sourcing your batteries from China, then you're geopolitically exposed. So India has got to come to solutions in terms of encouraging inward investment into cell manufacturing, but not just cell manufacturing. You've also got to get to the anode and the cathode manufacturing in the subcontinent to make sure that you're a winner in the long term.
Right. And so do you think when it comes to India, EV is the best bet, and maybe the government has made the right move by already choosing a winner in EV?
Well, again, don't pick winners. EV is the most mature solution globally. EV, I would say, almost certainly will play a big part in the move to sustainability. But also remember, as Joe Public starts to become more educated, they will also start asking questions about the CO2 involved in the manufacture of those EVs. And like, most consumers are now dissatisfied with the solution of diesel because of all of the side effects, there's a real risk that consumers will start to question the validity of EV as a solution. By the way, EV is much better than a gasoline vehicle over life. However, I think in starting up a new industry in EVs, and EVs certainly, I think, one of the winners, it's really important that we do that with sustainable power. So, part of the question will be as India retools towards new mobility, that it does so making sure that it's using energy solutions which are also green. So think about your wind farms, think about your solar farms, even think about your nuclear capability, but basically try to move the energy source away from carbon burning towards sustainable energy, because that then sets up the whole infrastructure, including the manufacturing of batteries and cars.
And Andy, talking about picking a winner in EVs by largely all politicians across the world, did the diesel powertrain die or in the verge of dying earlier than it would have been? As
you reach an inflection point, you know how it works. You get into transition is slow up to an inflection. I think as a global car industry, we're at that inflection. I'm not aware of really any major manufacturer that is investing in internal combustion engines right now. All of the investment, and let's be honest, it's heavy investment, is all into dedicated EV platforms. So EV is coming, and we need to get ready for it. And the fact that EV is coming from every manufacturer in the world, including those that were quite cynical about EVs initially, that means that you'll travel down the Moore's curve much more quickly. EVs will become much cheaper, and they will essentially replace the internal combustion engine, at least in the mainstream of transportation.
Right. And talking about EVs, let's talk about your own company, Switch Mobility, which has set a vision to be a leading electric commercial vehicle player, especially in the bus and van segment.
I want to say more than that, Sumantra. Switch is not just zero emissions in the classical sense of no tailpipe. Our company is net carbon zero. So it's a much more challenging task that we take on, because
so you are saying that Switch Mobility already is a net carbon zero company, whereas others are still striving to be so?
They're 10 years away in many cases. So we set up, because basically, yes, we're starting from a legacy position, but as we bring Switch to market, we do so with the benefit of being net carbon zero. Now, that's done in a combination of ways. That's driving out CO2 in the manufacturing of our vehicles, but it also, of course, at this stage involves taking carbon offsets. Nevertheless, I think we're the first automotive company in the world to be net carbon zero. Now, there comes in the education, because it sounds like net carbon zero and zero emissions is the same thing. And as I hope through this discussion with you, it is absolutely not. So we take the
offsetting in simple terms. to the layperson, in simple terms, it will be offsetting the emission made by at some stage of the whole chain through some various measures.
Yeah, so all of the carbon that's generated in our supply base through the manufacturing of the vehicles, through the life of the vehicles, and through the end of life, we either eradicate it scientifically or we take carbon offsets to make sure that we're at net zero. In other words, anybody that's traveling on a switch bus or is having their groceries delivered in a switch van can be assured that those vehicles are doing no harm whatsoever to Mother Earth.
How did you, could you briefly explain to us, how did you achieve that? How did you, I'm sure, what was the starting point, what was the plan, and how did you achieve this? And how long did it take?
Well, clearly you have to set out, again, the benefit of building essentially a new company from the legacy of the previous two is that you start with a blank sheet business plan. And, the first thing that you write into that business plan is the cost of those offsets and the cost of sourcing what is sometimes a more expensive source of material or supply. You then work that through how you can make a business proposition with that. And India becomes for us a very key part of the sourcing of parts, even when we're manufacturing overseas. So that allows us some of the cost offsets for the use of the more expensive raw materials. So, but the point is, it's fundamental to what we do, what I hope is as consumers around the world become more knowledgeable about this crisis, that they'll demand of their city mayors, of their politicians, that they will only use net zero buses and net zero vans. That's what I hope, is that this crisis generates the consumer pull towards the products that we're offering through Switch.
And I think this will cut across segments. This will cut across industries. Maybe from the electronics, white goods, even garment industry. The consumers will, as they are becoming increasingly more kind of aware about the challenge that the world faces, I think they will pose these questions.
Samantha, if we want our grandchildren to have a planet that's worth living on, we need to do this now. We need to do this now. So, and for that, companies need to start moving in this direction. Our governments need to start prejudicing their purchasing criteria to companies that are making products in this way. Simply moving to the cheapest electric bus and basically governments in India buying Chinese buses. That is not the right solution. They need to be asking whether those buses and vans are still harmful to the climate. And if the answer is yes, then look for another solution. And that's where I hope that Switch will become dominant, because we already offer that net zero solution.
And I presume that you'll be using that card while pitching for orders or tenders in India and other markets, right?
Yeah, I hope so. It's not an easy card because obviously, there's a cost associated with those technologies. But my main point is, you can't on one hand be an ambassador for COP, and on the other hand, not leading the charge. And it's important for us to lead the charge and to be recognized around the world as a leader in clean energy. And I'm proud of being part of this, in the same way I'm proud of having bought really the first modern day electric car, the Nissan Leaf, to market.
Right. And I wish you success in that charge, Andy. But before we end, I was curious to know when and how do you plan to tap the Switch Mobility's base, or rather tap India as a market and base for Switch Mobility?
It's coming soon. Very clearly we have a big advantage in a parent company being Ashok Leyland. Ashok Leyland has a good share of the van and bus market in India. As India transitions to electric vehicles, then that will naturally transition to the Switch offer. And we see India as a really important market. and a relevant market right now. And I think you know that we're involved in tenders already and starting to win tenders. So we're really now is the simple answer to your question.
And you were also developing a electric version of the those small commercial vehicle. Would that come first, or the bus?
The buses are probably coming first, but we will offer a van pickup type solution that fits into the equivalent of the DOST and BADA-DOST area of business, and we're betting on the fact that big companies, big logistic companies, also have a need to demonstrate that they're running not only zero emission but net carbon zero.
On that note, Andy, wish you all the success, you and your team, and hope the auto industry moves towards the net carbon zero target sooner than ever before.
Well, I'll be in India shortly. Now, thankfully, our countries are collaborating, and we can get around the COVID issues. So I look forward to seeing you and my Indian friends in the country in the very near future.
Same here. I look forward to meeting you sometime soon. And best wishes once again, Andy. Always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you, viewers, for watching this very interesting conversation with Dr. Andrew Palmer, Vice Chairman and CEO of Switch Mobility, and who is also a very strong proponent of net carbon zero. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.